there's people listening to this in Australia, fair, in Hong Kong, in the United States. And that's before we even get onto YouTube, onto the website. So this is the Open University of the Airwaves, and we have a case study this evening. We have a certifiable madman who has just strapped the world into a roller coaster cart that is headed for war. Think not that I am in any way exaggerating this. Let me tell you how it works. Donald Trump, as you've just heard on our news bulletin, has already drawn up the sanctions papers. Now, if it was a matter of the United States sanctioning Iran as punishment for the United States walking away from the Solomon-binding nuclear treaty signed by the United States under its previous president, that would be of no matter. As a matter of fact, trade between the United States and Iran is very, very scant indeed. However, the extraterritoriality of United States law is such that the United States has today warned in writing every country in the world that if any of you do any trade with Iran, we will sanction you. So German companies, French companies, British companies, the companies of every country in the world have been given zero notice for new contracts and 90 days to extricate themselves from existing contracts with Iran. This is an act of economic war. This is war by any other means. This means that the reward for Iran foregoing its inalienable, enshrined, entirely lawful right of pursuing a nuclear energy industry has been a war, a quarantine, a wall of sanctions designed entirely to besiege it. Now, the Iranians, as you've probably seen on your news bulletin, are not going to go quietly into that good night. And they are entirely right to say that they don't trust Britain one farthing. Not a single farthing is the promise of Boris Johnson, the buffoon, in the Parliament today, saying in very carefully chosen words how much he regrets Donald Trump's decision to walk away from an international, solemn, binding treaty obligation. Because the weasel words enshrined in Boris Johnson's remarks leave entirely open the possibility that Britain will fall into line behind Donald Trump. Less so President Macron, still less Chancellor Angela Merkel, and perhaps least of all, the spokesperson of the European Union. They all want to continue with the Iran nuclear deal, as well they should and might. But are they really going to allow their companies to face economic sanctions from the United States within 90 days? That'll be a test for the European Union, for Germany, for France, and of course for the United Kingdom. Now, if the 90-day period brings about the collapse of the permanent 5+1 treaty with Iran, there's no prizes. You don't need to be Einstein to work out what happens next. If the deal collapses, Iran begins to enrich its nuclear fuel, it will then be accused of trying to make a nuclear weapon, and it will then be attacked. It will be attacked by the organizer of Trump's international betrayal today. It will be attacked by Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu and Trump, both of them with the police closing in on them. Yes, the Israeli Prime Minister is facing 7 separate police investigations, virtually certain to lead to prosecution in the Israeli courts, who have repeatedly shown that they care not for the high position of criminals in their country. They have already imprisoned a previous prime minister. They have already imprisoned a previous president. It's very likely that if found guilty, Netanyahu is going to jail. What would be the very best diversion to avoid going to jail than to create a war with Iran? Donald Trump is facing investigation by the FBI, by the special prosecutor, by the deep state and the Congress on multiple levels, on everything from lying about payments to a striptease artist, lying about his relations with Russia, lying about that night in that Moscow hotel room when girls were quite wetting themselves with excitement to be in the presence of the great man. Both Netanyahu and Trump have now given themselves the ultimate wag the dog war preparation to divert the foolish. And both of them need it. Stocks on the New York Stock Exchange today in weapons companies went through the roof. An unprecedented rise in stocks and shares in the war industries in the United States on Wall Street today. If Israel attacks Iran, Iran will attack Israel back. Not in the first day directly. They will attack on the first day the head of the snake, the Saudi Arabian dictatorship, which has paid for and is coordinating this entire operation. It's no accident that the clown prince of Saudi Arabia visited the important capitals in this picture to set this whole chain reaction underway. So Iran will attack Saudi Arabia. America is bound to defend Saudi Arabia. Button up and belt up. Shackle yourselves to this roller coaster car, because this is going to make the Iraq war look like a tea party. And where does it leave Kim Jong-un? I've got to say this. He looks a bit foolish to me, the young un. Maybe because of his extreme youth for the important position that he holds. But he'd need to be a real mug to disarm North Korea at the behest of Donald Trump, when he can watch in real time right now the preparation for a war against Iran, not because it has a nuclear weapon, but because it doesn't have a nuclear weapon. So Kim Jong-un is going to demolish the nuclear weapons he's got as an act of trust in Donald Trump? Seriously? So I believe that the Korean crisis, that looked as if it was sailing serenely towards resolution, is now placed in the gravest possible doubt. And before leaving that subject, I cannot forswear to make this point. There is one country in the Middle East that does have nuclear weapons. It holds them entirely illegally, entirely secretly. It refuses to sign any non-proliferation treaties. It refuses to allow any inspection by anybody of its nuclear weapons program. We know from the brave Jewish whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu that 25 years ago, Israel had 220 nuclear warheads. One can presume that it doesn't have fewer today. So Iran is going to be attacked for not having a nuclear weapon by a country that holds hundreds of illegally acquired and entirely concealed nuclear weapons, backed by the only country in the world that has ever used nuclear weapons, namely the United States of America. Now, a few minutes ago, the more discerning amongst you will have noticed a rare complimentary note in my voice about the European Union. Their response to Trump has been exemplary on the Iran nuclear question. But that doesn't mean I want to stay. That doesn't mean I've changed my mind. But events in the unelected House of Lords this week have made it clear enough to me that Britain is not, after all, leaving the European Union. Brexit has been betrayed and destroyed by the very forces who had most to lose by Britain leaving the European Union. And it's all been wrapped up in ribbons of democracy. 17.4 million Brexit voters in a referendum that the government told us was binding on the political class, who made a decision that the government told us would be implemented by the political class, has been betrayed. Not even by the elected members of Parliament, that is yet to come, but by the brothel creepers, by the putrefying corpses of the British aristocracy, by the flatmates, the cash kings, the party donors, the people that have been stuffed, rammed into the House of Lords by successive party leaders, just in case one day they'd come in handy. That's what's in store for you tonight on the Open University of the Airwaves, the mother of all talk shows.